This is Autoline This Week, the show that gets you inside the global automotive industry. Underwriting for the production of Autoline This Week has been provided by RSM.
Prepare for challenges specific to your business by working with trusted advisors who help turn obstacles into opportunities. Experience the power of being understood. RSM, Audit, Tax, and Consulting for the Middle Market.
And now, here's your host, John McElroy.
I want to thank you for joining us on Autoline This Week. You know, some people say that the automotive industry is approaching the end of the ice age, the internal combustion engine. But is that really the case? What's really going to happen here in the next decade? Well, to get to the bottom of that, I've invited three experts who really dive into this. We've got Bob Gritzinger, Christie Schweinsberg, and Tom Murphy, all from Wards. These are journalists who study this issue, collect data on it, analyze it, report on it. So I want to thank all three of you for joining me here today.
Thank you, John.
But,
Good to be here.
Bob, let me throw it out to you to begin with, and you all can jump in. Is this the end of the ice age?
Not by far. There will be internal combustion engines in our projections well out to 2050.
Now, what do you see
in various forms?
There's other people predicting no, it's over and done with. Everything's going electric. A decade from now, 100% will be electric. Why do you say no?
A decade from now, 10%, right?
If even.
If even.
That's.
Why so, Christie? Why? You know, because the expectation among some people is that we're just on the tipping point of electrics just taking off and taking over the industry.
The sales results up to now have not been positive, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. You know, other than Tesla, nobody is selling BEVs, battery electric vehicles. Tesla sold 155,000 Model 3s, we estimate, last year. If you add together the volume of all the other nameplates, which I think are roughly a dozen, you probably get another 100,000, and that's across multiple automakers.
And then if you look at the broader market, you know, our forecasting partner, LMC Automotive, looks at out to 2030, half of the market, this is globally, of all powertrains available in all vehicles, half of the market is electrified. That means 50% is still internal combustion, which means engines that we have in the market today, if they, you know, the only way they can remain competitive in 2030 is either they're being fully replaced or they're being significantly improved. So we asked this question of a number of automakers. We just hosted a conference on this topic a couple of weeks ago, and we asked BMW and Ford and General Motors and Hyundai and Toyota, do you have clean sheet engines in the works? And yes, they do. Of course, they're not going to tell us exactly what, but we know that Toyota has them coming.
In other words, just for those who don't understand the term clean sheet engine, you're saying these automakers are developing brand new internal combustion engines that are probably still a couple of years away. They're working on them right now.
They are, yeah. Not a ton of them, you're right. I mean, because there's only so much money you can spend. If you have to develop your battery electrics and your hybrids and your plug-in hybrids and perhaps fuel cells, I mean, that's a lot of money that you have to devote to that. So you have to scale back somewhat on your ICE developments.
Yeah. What are the technologies then besides electrification that will improve the internal combustion engine, or are there technologies yet to come?
Well, valve train controls, emissions, exhaust, electrified turbos. Just in the past 4 months, two different suppliers have announced electrified turbochargers, essentially using the electric motor to serve as the supercharger compressor, but also operating as a generator to harvest exhaust gas power to put it back into the battery. So things like that step it up, the VC turbo.
Yeah, well, and I consider 48 volt to be a really important component. It's an add-on to the internal combustion engine, but it's getting you a certain level of efficiency and excellent stop-start, very smooth. When it shuts off, it turns back on very smoothly. And it's not that expensive, and you can put it on a Ram pickup truck, and you can put it on a Wrangler, and you can put it on all sorts of vehicles. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Christie, what do you think Supplier should do when it comes to this? I mean, here we're talking about the internal combustion engine not going away anytime soon, but it needs more electrification. And meanwhile, I got to believe battery electrics will continue to grow.
Right. Well, we're seeing consolidation, and presumably there'll be even more consolidation on the supply side for ICEs. I don't know. I don't have good advice to give, because certainly the regulations are such that people are doing things immediately, planning to do things immediately or in the near future, but the market, the consumer is not thinking, gee, I really want a BEV. There's a definite disconnect there.
Mm-hmm. The suppliers are in a very difficult position because they've been producing parts for internal combustion engines. They are trying to manage this transition from making valves and making all the hard parts and camshafts and springs and so many things that have gone into engines for so long, trying to keep making some of that, but pivot into more electrification. And some are going to succeed, and some are going to decide to find other lines of work.
But it's interesting also, though, that suppliers are now, I think, picking up more of the weight, more of the work as it relates to developing, building, maybe even manufacturing the electric motors, as opposed to the OEM directed system where they own the small block, they own the Hemi. It's our engine, we build it in-house. We'll take a few, we'll take some valves from you or some parts here, but we build the motor, the engine. Now the supplier may take more of a role in building the parts and assembling the motor.
Yep.
I got to believe when you look out on the world, not just in the U.S. market, that you're going to see different trends of adoption, a lot based on local conditions and even regulations. What do you think we're going to see?
Well, so in some of our data that we recently reported, we looked at that question, the major markets, Asia, Europe, and North America, and it was interesting. We see most of the growth coming in mild hybrids, which is the
48 volts,
the 48 volt and the stop start, and the BEVs, and it's uniform. The growth in those two segments from now to 2030 is equally aggressive in North America, Europe, and in Asia. It's really interesting, I think.
But 48 volt is spiking in Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's.
I got to believe that's because it's the lowest cost solution to being able to meet fuel economy and emissions regulations.
Easy way to get there. And if you can do a 48 volt motor, which has now been developed by Continental to also power the vehicle at zero emission, no ICE involved, now you have that low speed vehicle that can go into the carbon-free zones, the inner cities.
Very interesting. Christie, what do you think is holding back EV adoption? Is it the cost, because these cars are significantly more expensive, certainly to manufacture? Sometimes automakers will put a lower price on it. They don't make any money on it. Or is it just consumer resistance or a combination? What do you think?
I think a huge part of it is consumers just don't know what's available because these vehicles have not been marketed. Tesla, of course, doesn't need any marketing because everybody knows Tesla. You see the vehicles on the road, even here in the Detroit area, which is a big 3 stronghold, there's plenty of Teslas. We live in a bubble. We know these vehicles, we know what's available.
Media that covers this.
Yeah, but the general public has no idea about the Chevy Volt or the Bolt or the BMW i3 plug-in hybrid and BEV. These vehicles are really anonymous in the marketplace.
Yeah, let alone the 30 coming in the next year or two.
Exactly. So I think automakers really need to step up their marketing efforts. I mean, if they generally want to sell these vehicles, they need to let people know they're out there.
And it's disappointing because the Bolt is enjoyable to drive.
It is,
the
yeah.
Kona EV, the Hyundai Kona
Right.
EV, enjoyable to drive. Yes, the Tesla Model 3 is enjoyable to drive, but I mean, you can really enjoy driving a battery electric vehicle, especially if you're talking 250 miles of range or more. that'll get you to Traverse City, on one charge. So it's not that scary, I think. But it all depends on whether it's going to fit into a consumer's lifestyle, right? I mean, not everybody can look at, this is how far it takes for me to get to work in the morning, and this is going to work for me, especially if I'm not perhaps able to charge at the office.
Or at home,
And infrastructure
with a level 2 at home.
Infrastructure is
So,
a huge
yeah.
issue as well. Where to charge these vehicles. I mean, Tesla has their own network. That's great for them. Everybody else, it's scattered. You've got Electrify America coming out now. That looks very promising, but we'll see. But again, who knows? Does the general public even know about Electrify America?
They don't. And one of the issues I've seen is that there are a lot of charging stations all across the country, and people who own EVs know this. And as you all know, you can call up on the navigation screen, where's the nearest charging station, and it'll, on your nav,
And
tell
it'll
you how to
even
get
tell
there.
you if it's available and open, or if somebody's using it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, but there's no signs out so that the public can say, oh, there's a charging station. They tend to be hidden away, tucked away, and the like. So I think there's probably more charging stations out there than the public's even aware of because there's no signage for it.
You have to be mentally prepared for this transition in your lifestyle. If you're interested in it, then you're going to go on the web and you're going to start looking around and, oh, look, there's a map that shows me where all the charging stations are within a 5-mile radius of my house. I mean, it's just a matter of whether you're interested in it or not. I mean, people who are perhaps driving full-size pickup trucks aren't there yet, possibly. Maybe they will be when they find out that there's going to be a battery-powered Silverado
F-150.
and also
Hummer.
an F-150.
Yeah.
But it's to me, really, it is about kind of a mental conversion of getting people interested in them. And I think right now we're at this point where there's going to be in the next couple of years some really interesting vehicles coming out. We've got the Porsche Taycan, which is all electric, hot car.
$180,000 is
Yeah,
the starting
but
price.
at the other end, the
Understood.
Mustang Mach-E
Yeah, the Mustang
is going to
Mach-E.
be,
We've also
is
got
gonna
the
be a game changer, I
Volkswagen.
think.
We've got the
in terms of-
Volkswagen Cross that's coming. That's going to come out of Chattanooga. That's all electric. It's going to be a volume utility vehicle. We've got the Audi e-tron, which I know that's also expensive. But the point is, the automakers are throwing everything that they can at this right now, despite a very small market. So it's a very difficult proposition for them financially.
Yeah. It seems to me the biggest challenge for electric cars is the cost of the batteries. Whoever solves that or can get the cost down is going to blow this market wide open. But Bob, have you guys looked at that? I mean, battery prices have come down significantly.
Dramatically by the measure, price per kilowatt hour, but still not to the same level as what it would cost to put an ICE powertrain with all of its ancillary equipment into the vehicle. So it's
Yeah, I mean, there have been reports, a variety of analyses about battery cost coming down to maybe 100 a kilowatt hour. Something recent said, no, you can't go below 124 a kilowatt hour.
Yeah, there was an MIT study that said everybody who's predicting that battery costs are going to continue to drop is ignoring the cost of the materials that go into the batteries, the lithium, the manganese, the cobalt, the copper. They say you can't get below $124
those
per
prices
kilowatt hour.
don't change.
Right.
Or
Material
they get
you
worse.
can't go below the cost of the materials that go into the vehicle.
But that's also true
Or in the
for
battery.
internal combustion engines. I mean, it's not like making engines is going to become cheaper.
That's a great point,
'Cause,
Tom.
you know,
Talk more about
Well,
that.
you've got raw materials that are devoted to you got compacted graphite iron blocks that are, they're lightweight and they're very durable, but they're
More expensive.
somewhat expensive to make, So, and then a lot of technology that we're putting into these internal combustion engines, variable
Valve duration.
valve duration, and also this variable compression technology from Nissan. I mean, fascinating stuff. Both of those technologies made our 10 best engines list, 10 best engines and propulsion systems list. And we're going to see more of that stuff, and it's going to be expensive to bake that into internal combustion engines. Meanwhile, for the electric vehicles, it's basically motors. You know, I mean, you can really devote your time to making a motor more effective, but if that battery cost comes down to $124, then, you know, if the gasoline engine, if all of the internal combustion engine technologies are becoming more expensive, you do kind of reach,
at least
at some point, you get
narrow the gap.
Yeah, you
Close
get
the
within
gap,
striking
yeah.
distance.
Yeah.
You know, every engineer I've talked to has said, well, clearly plug-in hybrids are the best solution. You can travel pure electric power, you plug it in, you travel on the battery, but you've got this range extender, the internal combustion engine, and yet they just don't sell anywhere, not in the, they don't sell well. Sales have been going down in Europe, in the US, and China. Christie, why do you think?
I think, again, the general public doesn't understand a plug-in hybrid. The general public, I mean, I don't mean to disparage a huge group of people, but I think a lot of people know their car has an engine. They don't know what size it is. They don't know if it's, you know.
They know how to put gas in it. They don't understand plug-in. Wait, now, is that big, long extension cord? No, no, no. You know, it works in a different way, and as you point out, with the ability to operate fully electric. Part of the problem is that manufacturers may not be getting as behind it because they're not getting the credit for it, because regulators feel that people don't charge it and they don't drive it on pure electric power, so they should rate it as a gas engine.
I happen to love the idea of a plug-in hybrid.
Love
and the next car I buy, there's a very good chance that it will be a plug-in hybrid. Because I like the idea of kind of playing this game each day of, okay, I've got X as my range, and how much, you know, how can I maximize that range, and thinking about where I'm going to charge next, trying to keep that gasoline engine working as little as possible.
Yeah.
And
I drove
Christie
here
and I
today.
have both been Volt owners, so
So you're already there.
we're in
We're
tune.
there. We're there. I drove here today in my Volt. I don't know if I'm going to have enough electric range to get back to the office, but it doesn't matter.
But if
because
you had a
I've got-
charger here, she would.
That's
We do
true.
have a charger here.
Well, then
Should have
we need
plugged
it.
in.
Should have plugged in.
Darn, wish I would.
We have a level 2 charger, no less.
Oh, perfect.
But, you know, I think what I've encountered too, if you talk to BEV enthusiasts, pure battery electric vehicle enthusiasts, they sneer at plug-in hybrids because the plug-in hybrids have very limited electric range, typically. Some less than 20 miles.
Right.
And, you know, if you drive it in winter conditions, you can probably even cut that in half. And so I think I agree with you, Christie, that the true electric car enthusiasts really don't like plug-ins, and the
Yes.
public is confused. So there's a very narrow band of people who are willing to buy them.
Right, right. There's just so much confusion. Last year I was at a Toyota event. They presented some data that showed just a large percentage of the population believes a hybrid has to be plugged in. Not a plug-in hybrid, just a traditional hybrid. And then there was even a percentage of those surveyed that thought a BEV needed gas, I think. You know, it was a very small percentage, but there is a lot of confusion amongst the buying public.
And
how
the
do
people who know this stuff are all buying Teslas. So
What about hybrids then? I mean, Tom, you talked about 48 volts, but what about strong hybrids? More like what the Toyota Prius has
So
always
yeah,
been.
we had a hybrid that made our list this year, the Honda Accord hybrid. Great package that, you know, to Christie's point, you don't have to plug it in. It's kind of mindless, just put the gas in and away you go, and 47 miles per gallon is what we observed. Really impressive, and it's just everyday driving. You can go wherever you want with it because you're going to get you're going to find gas wherever you need it. And Toyota, this is what basically, you know, put hybrids on the on the map. The Prius, and the Prius isn't doing great now. Hybrids overall are not doing great, but there's still a lot of them out there. The Toyota RAV4.
They're doing well. They're doing
the Prius lost
better than
volume
you might think.
because of the RAV4.
because of the RAV4.
Right. I mean, so I think they did about 93,000 RAV4 hybrids last year. They
That's
expect
a lot.
It's a lot, and they expect to go over 100,000 this year. They've got new capacity they're installing. You know, a hybrid is, depending on how you look at it, more impactful than a whole bunch of BEVs. I mean, if you're selling 100,000 RAV4s and only 16,000 Bolts,
So in that sense, you have the need for great internal combustion technology plus, great electrification. If you put those two together, and you've got a hybrid. You've got a really good hybrid. You've got an enjoyable driving experience. So in that sense, I think there is still a future for those hybrids.
I mean, the argument is that it's two powertrains. You're carrying around two powertrains.
Yes, and that's inefficient and costly.
It is, but it's not as costly as a pure BEV. So, if I look at where battery prices are now, like in the Chevrolet Bolt EV, the battery alone is about $12,000. What I'm told, talking to experts in the industry, if you want to make an ICE a strong hybrid, like a Prius, you're adding about $2,000, $2,500 cost. So battery alone, $12,000, full hybrid system, $2,000 plus. Seems to me like the future should be bright for hybrids.
Yeah, and pricing of hybrids is coming down. In some cases, a hybrid might be less expensive than a higher trim level of the pure ICE variant. I believe the Ford Escape, the new generation Ford Escape, this is the case.
Yeah, the only car companies I see really taking hybrids seriously are Toyota #1, Ford #2, Honda #3. The others, some might dabble in it, but they don't seem to be taking it as seriously as those three.
Yeah, I think Wall Street is a factor there. Everybody wants to look progressive.
And that means battery electric.
And that means battery electric.
But if you come back to 48 volt, come to find out, FCA has suddenly become the leader in that hybrid technology. And of all things, the Jeep Wrangler is their leading mild hybrid seller. So it's kind of turning some of that on its head. But really the biggest problem is that, and not so much a problem, but that gas is so cheap. So,
well, certainly in the
why
US
worry about fuel economy like this?
Yeah.
In the U.S.
Yeah. Talk a little bit more about that mild hybrid, because it's also in the Ram pickup.
Yeah. Right.
They don't call them hybrids. Take it from there, Bob.
E-torque, and it's like they started adding this technology to the V6 Pentastar as a standard hybrid system in the 1500 Ram. They put it on the 4-cylinder in the Wrangler, and turns out the Wrangler hybrid version is outselling the Ram, which is a higher selling vehicle. So,
so for the Wrangler, we looked up the numbers. 66,000 4-cylinder Wranglers sold last year in the U.S.
Which are 48 volt.
With the 48 volt, out of about 230,000 Wranglers total. I mean, that's a big chunk. You wouldn't think that a lot of Wrangler buyers would want the 4-cylinder, but clearly they've identified it.
We should probably note the Ram, the e-torque in the Ram was a 10 best engines and propulsion systems winner.
Yeah.
And we saw some really impressive real-world fuel economy. Do you remember the numbers, Tom? What
we were well into the 20s, 23, 24 miles per gallon, I think.
Which is impressive in a huge
pickup. In a full-size pickup truck, absolutely. And then that 48-volt system is also paired to the Hemi. In the so they've got
option.
Yeah. So here we have FCA at the 4-cylinder, 6-cylinder, 8-cylinder mark for 48-volt systems. I just wanted to get back to that plug-in hybrid and hybrid question. Yeah. We were talking about that, and I thought, well, okay, so hybrids look good, and then you talk about, well, you got the cost and the extra cost of both an engine and and the electrification side. But with a plug-in hybrid, you've got more battery. You still need at least 30 or some miles of all electric range, and that, in my opinion, that makes the hybrid more attractive because you don't have that extra cost, in the plug-in hybrid. You don't have it in the hybrid. So. Yeah.
Hey, we're getting down to the end, but we should talk about one potential propulsion system in the future: fuel cells. Yep. Are we going to see hydrogen fuel cells? There's some, in California, for example, you can get a few of them from Hyundai and Toyota and Honda, but the numbers are, this is like an experiment.
Yeah. Again, on the personally owned vehicle side, it comes down to a question of infrastructure, and there just aren't a lot of hydrogen refueling stations yet in California. They're increasing in number. There's more that are in the permit process that are coming, but certainly not the level of what you would find for gas refueling or even electric vehicle charging stations. We see it as a very, very small percentage of future available.
So our forecast was, from LMC was suggesting well below zero right now, going up to 0.2% globally.
Market share.
Yeah, market share. In several years down the road. A lot of that growth coming in Europe, and apparently BMW is going to be one of those big players. In addition to Hyundai and Toyota, who are already there.
Because Japan and South Korea really pushing hydrogen fuel cells.
Yeah, you could probably get by with a fuel cell in one of those markets, but in the U.S. or even Europe at this point, it's hard to justify. But it is that future-looking technology that does work. We've driven it. We've given
Awarded.
10 best awards to it, and it's out there.
Yeah.
Decades in the future, but eventually we'll just be emitting a little bit of water.
And these are fun to drive. I mean, you've driven a fuel cell, right? I mean, there's nothing.
Look, it's an electric
unusual.
car.
It is.
And instead of a battery, it's got a fuel cell, which generates electricity.
Instead of having to plug it in, you pump it.
And you can fill the tank almost as fast as it takes to fill a gasoline tank.
Yeah. It is worth noting that several automakers see a relatively robust market on the commercial vehicle side for fuel cells. So even if they don't succeed, and in your neighbor, you don't have one in your driveway, chances are maybe the vehicle that brought your packages from Amazon might be a fuel cell.
Especially for long haul across the country.
Yeah.
Long haul, but also in port, those kinds of things. The places where you can create that hydrogen infrastructure in a closed environment.
Okay, well, I appreciate you guys looking out at the next decade. Now all you have to do is wait 10 years and see how right you were. But Bob Gritzinger, Christie, Schweinsberg, Tom Murphy, thank you so much for sharing all your insights on the end of the Ice Age.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
Underwriting for the production of Autoline This Week has been provided by RSM.
Prepare for challenges specific to your business by working with trusted advisors who help turn obstacles into opportunities. Experience the power of being understood. RSM, Audit, Tax and Consulting for the Middle Market.